Okay, well, welcome. It's very glad to have you all. Tonight is our AIA webinar, 166. Our title is Enfleurage of Lilac Essential Oil, and today is June 19th, 2019. My name is Inga Weiser, and I will be hosting the event, and we'd just like to welcome you all. Our speaker tonight is Charlie Pan Dawson. She's speaking on Enfleurage of Lilac Essential Oil. And Charlie Pan Dawson is an enfleuragist, that's how you say that correctly, who discovered, reinvented, and added modern efficiency to the ancient art of enfleurage. She and her husband own and operate a 6-acre lilac farm up in upstate New York called Cherry Valley Lilacs. Here she practices enfleurage of lilac and currently produces the world's supply of lilac POMADE and lilac essential oil. Her winter residence is in Florida, where she grows jasmine for enfleurage and has planted a food florist of edible, topical perennial fruit trees. As an environmental chemist, green building, indoor and outdoor air quality consultant, for work and school environments, and former asthma sufferer, she has been an outspoken advocate for healthy, breathable air. To her, fragrance is the new non-smoking. Chemical air fresheners, dryer sheets, artificial fragrances and materials, off-gassing into the breathing space she likens to smoking a pack of cigarettes or more a day. Our speaker, Charlie Pan, is a longtime proponent of natural scents. Her mission is to help cultivate a revival of natural scent extraction technique called enfleurage. She brings back into common knowledge the careful use of the floral therapeutic aroma for mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. Well, welcome, Charlie Pan. The floor is yours. And I will unmute you so you're ready to go. Oh, it's a little harder to unmute you. You're not unmuting for some reason. Oh, there you go. Now you're up. Okay. Sorry about that. Long pause.
That's all right. Thank you, Inga. This is Charlie Pan. And the topic is enfleurage of lilac. And I'm just playing around with my slideshow. Can you see the screen? The same thing I'm looking at?
I think we can.
Lilac enfleurage and lilac essence captured in traditional enfleurage. Wonderful. Okay. So I'll get started. I'm going to talk a little bit about lilacs in general because they're my passion. And then I'm going to talk about the context of enfleurage, which is the extraction method that I use to create lilac essential oil. So this is the lilac farm in the winter. We have 6 acres, as Inga was saying. About 3 acres are cultivated with lilac trees, about 150 different varieties. And this place is perfectly suited for lilacs. We need very cold winters. We need it to get cold and stay cold so that there's no warm spells in the middle of February where the buds would come out and get frostbitten. Occasionally we do have a warm winter and that happens, but we typically need at least 6 weeks for these lilacs to remain dormant. We're also on a bedrock of limestone, which creates a nice alkaline soil. And spring is very slow to come to this part of the world in upstate New York. We're in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains, very rural. Route 20 is our nearest highway of sorts, and that's a 2-lane road. So when we have a nice slow spring, it's the best. The buds get plenty of time to develop. Then around May 15th, sometimes as early as Mother's Day, we'll start to get buds popping out. I'm just going to run through a few pictures of lilacs just to dazzle you with the beautiful colors and pictures of pretty flowers. And then we'll get to the enfleurage. There are many, many different kinds of cultivars. There's 2,000. They're from all over the world. They're not indigenous to the US. Here we have more than 150 varieties. The bloom period for each of the bushes lasts only a week to 10 days, as you probably know. If you've ever had a lilac bush in your yard, you know they don't last long. So the wisdom of the farmer who planted this acreage about 25 years ago was to plant early bloomers and mid-season bloomers and late-season bloomers, and that gives us about a 30-day bloom period. All different kinds. Soggiana on the left, Frank's Fancy on the right, Maiden's Blush, a beautiful pink, all very scented. Lilacs are grown and bred mainly for their scent, but also for their looks. As you can see here, very fancy sensation on the right, the dark purple with the white edges. On the left is a big colossal bloomer called Beauty of Moscow. That's a Russian lilac. And then we've got Burgundy Queen on the left, and that one is Avalanche on the right. It's a very large white. And they all have different smells, quite different, in fact. Some are very honey-like, others are more spicy. The one on the right here is our first bloomer of the year. It's called Azure Plena. Azure meaning blue. It's a blue lilac, technically. And it blooms way before all the others, probably 2 weeks before. In some years, I don't get this one because it has been frostbitten by the warm weather, and then poking buds come out and then they get frosted. On the left is Bridal Memories. That's a mid-season bloomer, very scented. So we find the scent very captivating. Humans especially are attracted to this scent, and I think it elicits fond memories for a lot of people of childhood and images of their grandmother and mom's favorite flower. And so I feel that a lot of the feedback I get on lilacs is that it somehow connects us to our maternal side, our maternal ancestors, and some of the vernal energies of spring. So there are medicinal properties of lilacs known, even though there has been no essential oil ever created of the flower. Essential oil has been created of the wood, and the way this is done is a distillation process. The wood is distilled and made into an essential oil. This one is the Maiden's Blush that we saw, the bright pink, but this is before it blooms. You see the buds are just starting to poke. And some of the properties of lilac are listed here. That would be lilac wood. And it's been used as an anti-malarial, for instance, for 100 years or more. There's a lot of folklore associated with lilac, and it was believed to provide safe passage for sailors. And on the Mayflower, women traveling to the New World brought a sprig for good luck, carried it in their bosom. And the first lilacs were planted in the US at that time. So the other point I wanted to make, the syringa. Syringa vulgaris is the common lilac, and that is the Latin for syringe. Syringa meaning syringe, and it's a hollow tube, refers to the hollow stems of the lilac, and it's believed that Pan used lilac to make his pipes. So there you have some folklore. And why is there no lilac essential oil of the flower? There's lilac essential oil you'll find very rarely, but you do find it. And the real authentic essential oil that you'll find is of the wood, as I mentioned before. But you'll also find a lot of fakes and fragrances that are conjured or formulated from synthetics, sometimes from a mixture of synthetics and natural oils. And sometimes they'll actually be natural oils, but it'll be a formula of a mixture of other oils, not lilac flower. But it could be gardenia, jasmine, or others that are easily distilled. So whenever you see a lilac fragrance oil, it is generally synthetic. And if you know Hermitage oils they were of New Zealand, but now they're in Italy. They're selling very high quality oils. This is a quote from Adam at Hermitage Oils. He says, "There is no essential oil of lilac. The yield is non-existent. There is no lilac absolute either, and many attempts have failed. Throughout history, the desire for the beautifully floral scent of lilacs has spawned many different blends, fragrance oils and butters, and although these have become gradually more sophisticated and complex as new materials are discovered, they are still all just imitations of the naturally sweet floral delight of the natural lilac. Even the so-called pomades of the past, the lilac pomades, now get this, they were actually perfumed with a mix of benzoin, styrax, and hyacinth. So they weren't actually lilac pomades at all. They were a hyacinth pomade that had been mixed with benzoin and styrax. Those are chemicals that have lovely sweet smells. And it somehow resembled the lilac. So for centuries, this was the case. In old perfume texts that I have, Poucher, I believe is his name, he said, "Oh, forget it. It's impossible to make lilac essential oil. You may not be successful, and why even bother? It's too much work." So he provided formulas for making a synthetic lilac oil. So when I read this, I thought, well, there's a challenge. Here we have a lilac farm. Why not make essential oil of lilac? Well, the reason you can't distill lilac is multifold. For instance, rose can be distilled. You can also do enfleurage with rose. You can do enfleurage with many, many different flowers. But with rose, for instance, as in also with flowers such as lavender, etc., you can distill those flowers. And why is that you can distill those and not lilac? It's because in the petals of the rose, contained within the petals of the flesh of the plant, is the scent. And it's not the case with lilacs. With lilacs, the scent is created, it's generated while the plant is alive, and it's not contained within the flesh of the petals. So it has a little scent gland like an orchid has, where it's produced. So you have to keep the plant alive. It's something I found out working with lilacs. If you are to create a maceration, which is dousing it in a oil or alcohol, you won't get any scent that you want. You'll get a sour kind of plant scent, but you won't get the lilac scent. And the reason for that is you're actually dousing the little factory that creates the scent. So the scent factory is located in the bottom of the little floret. And you see, if you were to break off a piece of the petal and chew on it, it's edible. So you can do this. You won't taste any of the flower. You won't taste that smell. It's not contained in the flesh. You can pick a bunch of little petals and you won't smell lilac. You'll only smell lilac if you keep the little factory alive. So with Enfleurage, I thought this would be the best possible chance to create an essential oil of lilac flowers. And enfleurage is a French term for an ancient, labor-intensive, and all but vanished technique in which a fat is used to absorb scent from fresh, exhaling flowers. Note that we use the term exhaling because in this little factory down inside the flower, it's actually creating scent and pumping it out into the air. It's releasing it into the atmosphere. So as it releases that scent, we can then capture it. It's a very unique feature in the plant physiology of lilacs. So if you were to distill it, you'd put it in alcohol or water and you'd boil it, and then you'd condense the vapors off of it. And you're getting just the sour smell of the plant, green, woody smell. It's rather pleasant, but it doesn't smell like lilac flowers. Here, Enfleurage captures the most delicate aromatic compounds and components and the most comprehensive spectrum of scent molecules without denaturing or destroying any of the elements with heat. Heat would destroy them. Dousing them in liquid would destroy them, little factories. So once I understood this, I could then create an environment where I could capture the scent. But I had to understand the physiology. So on this property, lo and behold, there is a little studio building that was a pottery studio from the former owners. She was a potter, and she left this beautiful little building with a wheel and a kiln. Well, my daughter's a potter, so I gave her the equipment, and I started embarking upon this journey. I looked up many texts on perfuming and extraction techniques, and I'm a chemist by training, so I had some background, but it really didn't apply here because there was history. I had to recreate a lot of what I created from photographs, and the equipment wasn't available, so I had to create the equipment, design the equipment. My husband helped me make these chassis. These are chassis what the women are holding, and they're applying these flowers, these massive piles of flowers that have been picked. It's probably jasmine on the left with the great stacks of chassis in the background. And this was what was done probably 100 years ago and more, in the 1700s, the 1800s, and 1900s. It quit around 1920, and other methods came into play for these flowers of jasmine. Can be distilled, although it's really a fraction of what the scent is when you do enfleurage with it. But most flowers can be distilled, or there's CO2 extraction. There's other ways to derive the essential oil, but not with lilac. And lilac had never been done in the past either. So here, this is what I looked at and studied in order to get an idea of how to do this. So to make an essential oil from enfleurage, there are 3 stages you have to go through. The first stage is you need to create the pomade. And the pomade is a fat substrate that you lay the flowers on, and you create a chamber where the flowers exhale into the space, And the saturated fat, whatever fat you're using, will soak up the smell over time. Every day you have to change the flowers for 30 days to create a pomade. And the second phase is to create an extrait from the pomade, which is an extraction phase where you would be pulling the essential oil out of the pomade. And I'll show you more about this in just a minute. The third phase is to create the essential oil. So I knew how to do the pomade. I'd seen the pictures just as I saw. So I set about creating these chassis, and I built them and had my husband help me. He designed them, and we use a special wood that doesn't impart smell. And we have tempered glass in the frames. These are some experiments I'm doing right now with, on the right is peony. Those are, I think they're called top hat peonies. I can't remember the name, but they're very fragrant. And on the left is mock orange, and I'm making pomade out of mock orange as well. So any flower can be made into a pomade. I want to stress that for people at home making small amounts of essential oils or blending, making perfumes, making custom scent for any kind of uplifting or just to give joy to people. If you want, you can use any flower. You just have to be careful of toxicity, because if it's something you're going to put on your skin, of course. And aromatherapists know more about this than I do. But just about any flower can be made into a pomade. In Florida, as Inga mentioned, I have planted a jasmine crop, and I harvest the jasmine. There are several neighbors in my neighborhood in Englewood, and they're also growing jasmine. We've created a jasmine guild where we're all creating pomades, and then I'm extracting the essential oil from the pomade. So we'll have that available in the future. But that's an easy one. Jasmine is very easy to extract with enfleurage. Lilac is a little tricky. So with lilac, this is the process to create the pomade. Smelling, that's part of my job. Smelling for the best smelling lilacs. We have over 150 in the field, different varieties. So I had to go around each year. I go around in the spring and I look for the most scented varieties. And there are about 30 that I use, 30 or 40 different lilacs that pass muster on scent. They have to be very fragrant and of a certain type of fragrance. I like the spicy, uplifting. I don't like the honey smells. It smells too much like honey locust. So I go around and I pick the ones I'm going to be using, and then I set about cutting bushels and bushels and bushels of flowers every day. Then we sort and clean and dry. If there's any moisture, if there's been a dew or rain, we want to make sure that doesn't contaminate the chassis. And there's my friend Valerie, and she helps me. I have a lot of people come and help, and I teach classes, and there's also people who come for retreats. So once we've picked our flowers, we know which ones we're going to use. We've got to prepare the corpse. And the corpse is the fatty substance that's laid on the glass. I've got a little double boiler there, and I'm spreading fat thinly across the glass, allowing it to dry. And then stacking and sorting, and I use a much thinner coat of fat now. As you can see on the left there, it's pretty thick. That was early on in my discovery. On the right, you'll see it's thinner now. It's more of a glaze on the glass than it is clumps of fat. In this picture I'm using, I know there'll be some questions about this. The fat that I'm using in this picture is palm oil, and it's mixed with a little cocoa butter for stiffness. Traditionally, it was lard or tallow that was used as a substrate to collect the scent on the corpse. So then as I said before, lilacs have to be kept alive for their scent-making physiology to release the scent. So we keep them alive, and we don't denude them from the little branches. We keep them in little clumps, and they breathe into the space where the fat can be exposed. So we expose the fat, the corpse or the fat that's in the chassis to the flowers for 30 or more days consecutively. Enfleurage is the process of adding the flower, and defleurage is the process of removing the flower. So we perform this cycle 30 times or more with the fresh flowers. And of course, the enfleurage studio must be kept at a constant temperature below melting point of the fat. For palm oil, it's a very low temperature. I think it's 74 degrees. I have to keep it below that, or my chassis will be melted. So here's enfleurage in action. We do about 60 kilos of fat every year. You can see the chassis are stacked. Sometimes I've got a little moisture in there, so I'll cock them to one side. You can see the stack on the left has a little angled stack, and there's a little air breathing going on in there so that the moisture can be let out. And if you get mold in the chassis, it's a disaster. So we have to keep it very clean and very dry. As I said before, we need 30 days of blossoms. So the former owners of the farm who had planted all the trees, George Alverson and his wife, Alice May, they planted everything on the farm here. They, in their wisdom, wanted to create a longer bloom season so that visitors to the farm could have a more spectacular time and visit for a longer period during the spring. So he planted early, mid, and late season bloomers, which gives us well over a month of blossoms. We're very fortunate. So after a month has gone by, we've changed the flowers every day in this labor of love. I've had people come and visit thinking, oh, how romantic to pick flowers all day. And yes, it is romantic, but they say, wow, we never thought it would be so much work. Well, it is. You're up and down, you're on ladders, you're carrying baskets, you're moving trays and chassis here and there, and brushing them out if there's any bugs or little pieces of flour that get stuck to the fat. We have to clean the fat. So it's a lot of work. And after 30 days, this pomade is a richly scented butter. I take my little paint knife, my scraper, and I scrape it up. Now it can be used as a standalone perfume, solid perfume. It can be used as a moisturizer or a massage butter. It's very aromatic, and it can be used as a medicinal. Folks have reported back to me that it helps with eczema and psoriasis and some other fungal infections. Anyway, it's a very magical thing, and we don't know a lot about it yet because it's never really been created before. So all of the news I'm collecting, gathering on the feedback that I get is going into a record of this substance. The solid perfume, the Enfleurage pomade, has been used for centuries in Egypt, China. So it can stay as a solid perfume for all intents and purposes. It's perfectly fine. But I wanted to get it to the essential oil stage. So that was the real trick. And I discovered that after the enfleurage is complete, I can scrape the corpse up, immediately submerge it in 190 proof organically grown spirits. This is cane alcohol. And I can leave the pomade soaking in the alcohol all winter long for a year, in fact. And the alcohol will selectively dissolve the lilac oil from the pomade, making the extrait. This is called the extrait. So after 8 months, 9 months soaking in the alcohol, I can then take the fat out. I can sieve it out with a strainer or filter it out, and I'm left with the alcohol containing the essential oil of lilac that it has extracted from the pomade. This was a monumental concept. And then I've got the extrait in a jar. As you can see there, I'll have hundreds of these jars lined up, hundreds of them with the pomade and the alcohol, waiting for the next year so that I can extract it. And after a year's gone by, I will filter out the fat and store the extrait in jars. And at home, you can do this without my fancy equipment, and you can use Pyrex dishes to make your pomade, and then you can filter out the fat from the pomade and take your extrait after a year and put it in a jar and cover it with a nice little coffee filter, and the alcohol will evaporate out, gradually concentrating the essential oil. And once you've evaporated all the essential oil, all the alcohol, you'll be left with probably 5 mils of, 5 milliliters of essential oil. You can do this with any flower. It's a universal concept. So here I've got a jar just as a demonstration, but I don't use this method except for very small batches. I might use it for the pomade that's created from the mock orange or the peonies that you saw before, and for small runs that I don't want to send through my expensive equipment. But the final phase of evaporation can take place in this little jar with a filter over it, or you can use a very fancy studio equipment that I have. And this is a complex process using vacuum and chiller, but what it affords me is I'm able to capture and reuse the cane alcohol spirits as they gently evaporate from the extrait. So I can reuse it time and time again. It's 100% pure, or 190 proof when I finish with it. It's probably even more distilled than that when I'm finished with it. And I'll reuse it again for more extrait, for soaking more of the pomades. So that process there, using the machinery, if you wanted to get into that, I do teach a course. It's a 3-day hands-on workshop on this unique process. But like I said, it can be done at home with using simple tools, a mason jar and a coffee filter with a rubber band. So I'll show you that it's a very intensive process. More than 4 bushels of flowers and many hours go into 5 mils of lilac essential oil. I do sell it. I sell it into wholesale markets and retail as well. But it's very rare and, as you can see, very time intensive. But it's a beautiful thing. There's the farm. 1860 postcard. You can find us in Cherry Valley, New York. If there are any questions, I'd love to take them. If I can hear you, I'll answer questions, or
What you need to do,
Inga,
yeah,
can
just unmute yourself if you have a question and start talking. If somebody else is talking, just give them a chance to finish their question and then start. So the floor is now open for questions.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What is the shelf life of the essential oil once it's completed?
That's a good question. And I don't know yet because I have essential oil that is 3 years old. I've been doing this for 3 years, actually 2.5. I started, I cracked the code July 2017. So I have oils that are that old. That's 2 years, I'm sorry, 2 years, not even 2 years. So I don't really know how long they will last. But I know that what helps them last is keeping them from light, keeping them in a dark bottle, blue. I use blue bottles, as you saw in the last picture, and also keeping it cool. And I put a layer of alcohol on top if I know it's going to be exposed to air, and that way I'll plunge my little pipette through the alcohol layer to extract it from the vessel. If I'm using a vial or a test tube, I'll pull it out using the pipette, and I won't expose it to air. But it has a long shelf life, and there are ways of fixing it as well. I know that there's a perfumer in California who's told me to use, there's a number of different fixatives. Another is cedar, and there's others as well, balsa. But it has a low volatility, so you can preserve it for a long time.
Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. Is anyone doing enfleurage at home? Sometimes I'll get one in the audience.
I guess not.
I guess not, okay.
That is
Well, it's easy to do. You just need a Pyrex dish. You just need a Pyrex dish and some fat. You can use lard. You can use cocoa butter, coconut oil, palm oil, shea butter. You can use any number of hydrogenated fats that are hard at room temperature. And it absorbs beautifully. It's one of the properties of hydrogenated fats is that they absorb particles from the air. When I was a chemist working for the state, I went on some tours with one of my colleagues, and he was checking restaurant butter. He would go into the back cooler of restaurant in New York City and test for formaldehyde. And these restaurants were next to dry cleaners. And the dry cleaning fluid, the formaldehyde, that vaporized into the air would be evidenced in the butter in the restaurant. That's how high the propensity is for fats to absorb scent or molecules out of the air. It was shocking to me at the time, but I always remembered that, and it was something I drew from when I created the enfleurage of lilac.
Well, that really is quite a labor-intensive time of flowers. So when you're done, would you say that's correct?
I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
I said, so it takes you about 18 months from when you start to when you have your essential oil?
Yeah, it's about 12 to 14 months. I usually am able to process all of last year's pomade in the first month, in June, and it runs into July. So yeah, about a year and 2 months it takes to create the oil. The longer you let it soak, the better your yield from the pomade. The fat is very absorbable, absorbs the scent very well, but it's more difficult to get it out of the fat and into the alcohol. So that's why we let it sit for a year. And then remove it, the extrait from it, and evaporate it off. I'm always trying to improve the yield and create better efficiency in the process so that it's a better yield and we get more out of our time and effort.
So, well, you've had quite a few comments. People have really enjoyed hearing what you had to say and quite taken with all the work that you put into creating it and capturing that scent. Somebody said that they had a friend that does enfleurage, even though we didn't have somebody here. So again, the lines are open. You're welcome to ask questions. So now's the time to get your answer. You probably won't get anybody more knowledgeable on lilac essential oil than what you have right here tonight with us. So,
hey, this is Marnie from West Virginia, and thank you so much, Charlie. This was great. I've never heard of anything quite so difficult. Maybe extract such a beautiful thing. But my question is, okay, so you can save that alcohol. Can you save the fat? So you use palm and cocoa butter, which I would think maybe cocoa butter would add its own scent. So maybe you can explain that. And then do you save that for the next year as well? Does that come away clean?
Great question, Marnie. Thank you. The fat still has a little bit of scent in it. You can try to remove all of the essential oil from the fat, but it is near impossible. It's such an absorber that I have found there's a name for it, and I can't remember the name. In ancient texts, I saw it referred to as an important byproduct of enfleurage that some manufacturers were interested in buying. So I've started to make soap out of it. It's beautiful fat for that. Any fat really makes a good soap, but palm oil especially lathers so finely. So that can be used for soap making. I've not been able to reuse it because of the alcohol in it, and that is really difficult to remove. Over time, it'll evaporate out. There's a tiny little bit of evaporative alcohol in it, and I haven't been able to really use it. I want to use pure fat each time. I want to use unscented. There's in your question about the cocoa butter, there is unscented cocoa butter that's been, I guess they call it washed cocoa butter. So it's had the scent removed, and it smells just a tad like chocolate, but very, very light, and it does impart some scent. So I have to be watchful of that and careful which flowers I use cocoa butter with. I don't want to use cocoa butter with lilac except for my massage butters, because it is such a great butter for skin that when I know the pomade is going into massage butter for a client, I will use a percentage of cocoa butter, and it creates a nice consistency for massage as well. So yeah, there is a tiny bit of smell in cocoa butter. You're right. Even though it's been deodorized, even palm oil has a tiny little bit of scent. But you can get coconut oil without scent, and it just smells like, I don't know, it smells like nothing. And that is a really good absorber as well. But again, the byproduct, the chassis, the corpse after it's been made into the extrait, I just use it for soap right now.
So that's fascinating. Thank you. This is Marnie. So then that brings up my one other question. And if they used lard before, how in the world would they descent that? And
yeah, it's a process. Now
to that, but I don't understand.
It's a long, drawn-out process. No, I tried to do that in the beginning. I took tallow, and it's a mixture of tallow and lard. And I forget the difference between the two right now, but there's a difference. One is rendered and one is not. I think that's the difference. And you have to render it yourself. You have to strain it. You have to boil it. You have to wash it with detergent. And it's quite a process. You can't buy it already washed like that for the purposes of enfleurage. But if anyone were doing that, I'm sure I could then buy it. But I couldn't do it all myself. So I opted for vegetable fats. Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked it.
One of our people was wondering if the fat that was left over with the scent would be called a concrete.
No, I don't think so. I have to look that up, but I think a concrete is, I couldn't say. I couldn't say for sure. Someone in the audience might know more about it than I.
Okay.
But for the first year, yep, I'm sorry.
Is a product of absolutes or a product, so it's a product of absolutes or a byproduct, they should say. So.
Oh, well, concrete is a byproduct of an absolute?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's a drier version. I do take mine down a notch. I will dry it. I don't take it to that concrete stage, but I do dry it. It's called, I'll call it, it's an anhydrous lilac essential oil. So when I first evaporate the alcohol off, sometimes the year has been very wet and the nectar from the plants, the scent was weak and there was a lot of water in it. So I'll take that evaporative process a step further and I'll pull a vacuum on it and I'll take the moisture so that it concentrates even more. But I don't do it down to the extreme of a concrete. I just take the moisture out, probably about 10 or 20% moisture out, and that concentrates the smell so that I get a stronger essential oil. Because it's not a distillate, so I'm not concentrating it, I'm not cooking it, I'm not heating it and boiling it and condensing it. It's just evaporative, a very low temperature evaporation, 80 degrees, like room temperature, just slightly above. And I pull a vacuum so that it will atomize a lot quicker.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm always available for questions. I've got a website and a YouTube channel, and I want to encourage people to practice this at home. There's a wonderful book called The Perfume Collector, and it's a real joy to read. It's a lovely book about a woman who really repairs her life through enfleurage, and it shows the steps she takes to create the pomade. She doesn't take it to the essential oil stage, but she makes a beautiful pomade with her child's thread from her child's sweater, lock of hair, things that have a familiar smell in her life, and it's a beautiful story woven in there. So that's a good read. But I want to encourage people, I think it's one of the natural arts, and enfleurage is like poetry or writing and music. Everyone should know how to do it and be able to create a scent that's uniquely their own, from household items, from their garden. And you don't need fancy apparatus or equipment to do it. For the first year, I used Pyrex dishes. I didn't have the chassis built. I used Pyrex dishes, and I experimented with 6 or 8 different kinds of fat and flours, and it was easy to do and create a pomade.
Now, do you pick each blossom off, or you just put them on as the whole bunch?
Yeah, good question. I don't pick each blossom off because, as I said earlier, we want to keep that flower alive as long as possible. So if it's on its stem, it's got more moisture to pull from, and it'll keep it alive longer. And that little scent factory, the scent gland deep inside the flower, needs moisture to be able to operate. So if your flower wilts or dries out, it won't produce any scent. So keeping it alive as long as possible, I do keep them on the stems.
Oh, great. Anybody else? We have a few minutes left, so you can get your question in.
I do have a question, Charlie. Is it possible, what happens if the fat does melt? Does that release the scent from the fat? Is that the reason you use something solid rather than like fractionated coconut oil?
Yeah, that's a good question. The fat, if the fat were to melt, it doesn't lose its scent, but it would stick to the flowers, and I don't want it to stick to the flowers. I want it to stay solid so that it holds itself, its body. And the reason liquids don't work is not because they're liquid, it's because of the hydrogenation. It's a chemical reaction that is happening when the flower essence is in contact with the fat. The saturated fat will absorb the scent, and a liquid fat will not. It won't do it as well, and it may not do it at all. It's debatable, but it certainly doesn't do it as well. So we try to keep the fat solid so it doesn't, the plants don't get stuck in it, the flowers don't get stuck in it, and also so that it, the hydrogenation of the fats helps to absorb the scent. So liquid coconut oil wouldn't work. And olive oil or anything like that would probably not work as well either. I only used saturated fats in my experiments.
Okay, that actually answers another question I had. Is that the flowers actually have to make contact with the fat, or if they were separated slightly, would the fat still be able to absorb that scent?
Oh, yes, that's a great question. Now, you see in some of my pictures, there are some screen boxes, and I use a screen to lift the flowers off the fat, especially when they're wet or there's some elements of that flower that I don't want absorbed into the pomade. So I do raise them up inside the chamber. I also lay them right in the fat as well, but they don't have to be in contact with the fat. You saw did you see the peonies and the mock orange? The mock orange sits right on top of the fat all the time because they're very dry flowers. They don't moldy. And when they wilt, they just dry up like paper. The same with jasmine. You can put the jasmine straight directly into the fat, and when they get old, they just dry up like paper, and then you pick them out. But with lilac, there's a lot of moisture in there. They will mold. So sometimes I'll raise them up off the surface of the fat. But you don't have to be. It's just a chamber. What you're trying to create is a little chamber where the flowers can exhale into the fat, creating, you want to have a closed space like a little box. When I was using Pyrex dishes, I'd put a little cellophane over the top, a little saran wrap. But I keep a little section open so you don't get any condensation and moisture buildup. I'd keep a little corner open. But basically, you were just creating a chamber where the flowers would breathe their scent into the chamber, and the molecules that were in the air would gradually settle into the fat and be absorbed. Yeah, very good questions. We're getting technical now. That's good.
Well, I think we're going to need to wrap up. Our hour is just about over. I thank you greatly. This has been quite a learning. I think for everybody who came on, I doubt that anybody had all that much experience in enfleurage. So that's, you know, something totally new to us. I did get to see part of the process when I was at the Perfume Museum in France, and I got to go to it in Ross, and they were doing it. So I got to see a demonstration there, which was very interesting. So I thank you.
Yes, they have beautiful pictures on their website too. I actually called them and asked them when I first began this process, does anyone teach Enfleurage there at the Institute of Perfume in Grasse? And I talked to the director, and she said, no, my dear, the great masters are gone. You're going to have to figure it out yourself. But here's some pictures, and they showed me the pictures, and they do a little bit of pomade making there for demonstration. But they no longer have the instructors for it, so I wasn't able to learn there, but I figured it out, and now I'm teaching it.
Right. So is there anybody else that sells lilac essential oil, or are you it?
I'm it right now.
Well,
that's it. Yeah.
that's
And
pretty
I'm teaching
phenomenal.
it so that hopefully there'll be more.
That we have you on as the one and only. So
It's true. Hopefully there'll be more. I'm trying to cultivate a culture around this method and create a guild. I've got a guild in Florida for jasmine enfleurage. So hopefully more and more will catch on and realize how beautiful a practice it is and how enriching it can be in their lives.
well, thank you again.
So thank you. Thank you, Inga.
Much.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Welcome. So we'd like to thank Charlie Pan for being on tonight. Next month, on July 17th, the third Wednesday, will be Casey Rossi, and she's going to talk about business development, which is always important when you go into business to know how to run one as an essential, as an aromatherapist or massage therapist or any other way that you might be using essential oils. And as always, it's the third Wednesday of the month, unless we find somebody that's a fantastic speaker that can't quite fit in our schedule. We may adapt our schedule to fit their schedule in some circumstances. But we are following our routine next month. So thanks so much. I'm going to stop the recording. And